We get on with our main event, and Angela's organizing us, so we have just a couple of items. One is the approval of the agenda, which we have two big items here. We're going to talk about this definition of equity, and I tell you, I remember sitting downstairs when I first came. The first committee of the whole was, let's talk about defining equity, and 2.5 or 3 hours later, I thought two things. One is, we need to kind of make sure this is done in 2 hours. And two, we'll never decide. We need process. Good, we're going to actually have talking about that. And then always about planning, scenario planning for water planning. So interesting topics for all of us. But first, is there a motion and a second to approve the minutes from our meeting on October 4th?
So moved.
Second.
Thank you. Any discussion, corrections? All right, hearing none. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, the minutes are approved. Angela, we're in your hand.
Thank you so much. Council members, I'm Angela Torres. I'm the Senior Manager of Local Planning Assistance in the Community Development Division. As you all know, I've seen my face many times. I'm also the sponsor for the equity work as part of the 2050 Regional Development Guide. And I'm here today with a couple of our task force members. You may remember at the last meeting when you endorsed the regional equity framework for Imagine 2050, that we talked a bit about our structure internally. And there have been staff that have been diligently working for a couple of years now on drafting and reviewing and researching the various definitions from trusted equity professionals, organizations like GARE and others, Government Alliance on Race and Equity, and many other organizations too. And so there's been a lot of work that's gone into the drafts that you will see today. We just want to make sure that you have an opportunity to provide your more specific feedback. If you're concerned about anything, we're here to facilitate that discussion with you today. We do have a little bit of a structure, so we even have timers because we want to respect our colleagues that are on the agenda after us. So we have 1 hour for this discussion, so we'll be efficient about it. The Equity Task Force members, again, as I was mentioning, are internal staff working on this. Just a quick reminder of what the equity framework itself is. We were here last time, contextualized, community-centered, and reparative. And we want to make sure that the equity framework is really grounded in the definitions that we're using as we do equity work more broadly across the regional development guide. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Maya. Yep.
Perfect. Good evening, Chair and Council members. My name is Maia Guerrero-Combs, and I'm here today as a representative of the 2050 Regional Development Guide Equity Task Force. And as part of the project charter for that group, we are responsible for leading the process to draft the definition for equity for the 2050 Regional Guide. Thank you so much. So as an overview for today, for this section, we will first be going over the proposed definition for equity and for the 2050 Regional Development Guide, and then breaking into small groups, which you're already at, for discussion to make sure we capture all your feedback today. And so, what is the process and how did we get here? The process for this draft definition really started with an inventory of different definitions and equity efforts across the council from other public agencies in the region as well as community groups in the region. So a few examples of some of the work that was evaluated and inventoried in this process was the Young Leaders Collaboration, who you heard from earlier this summer, the State Minnesota One framework, internal definitions of equity across different divisions, and of course the equity framework that you just saw on the previous slide. And through that evaluation, a draft definition was proposed by the Equity Task Force and has subsequently gone through many stages of feedback and internal review, both within the task force as well as other internal groups such as the Regional Development Guide Integration Team and the Equity Advisory Committee. So now we're here today and we're really excited to hear all your feedback. And so I want to highlight that through that process, we landed on 5 conditions of success through that process of evaluation and feedback. And those 5 conditions of success are for defining and implementing equity. And they've been used to ground our work in defining equity in this process. So those 5 conditions of success are to lead with race, to have accountability, to incorporate historic context. Equity needs to be action-oriented, and equity requires the sharing of power with community. So by making sure the definition of equity in our 2050 Regional Development Guide is grounded in these 5 conditions for success, we ensure that our definition of equity, our draft definition, is contextualized, community-centered, and reparative, as we saw in the equity framework that you reviewed last month. It also ensures that it is representative of all the feedback and engagement data that we've evaluated throughout this process. So what is it? Let's get into it. The proposed definition for equity in the 2050 Regional Development Guide is as follows. Equity at the Metropolitan Council means that historically excluded communities, especially Black communities, Indigenous communities, and communities of color, have measurably improved outcomes through an intentional and consistent practice of adapting policies, systems, services, and spending so that they contribute to the repair of both historic and ongoing injustice. Here we have additional supporting points that provide context to the equity definition and show how the definition is grounded in the 5 conditions of success that emerge through evaluation and feedback. The first is lead with race. Equity is a process of improving outcomes toward eliminating disparities between Black people, Indigenous people, and people of color, and white people living in the Twin Cities region, as these groups continue to bear exceptionally large and persistent inequities across nearly all metrics of well-being and economic opportunity. The second is action-oriented. Equity requires an intentional, ongoing, and consistent practice of adapting policies, systems, and structures. Next, we have historical context. Equity requires the council's systems, services, and spending are just and designed to repair both historic and ongoing injustice. And under power sharing, equity requires that historically excluded communities, especially Black communities, Indigenous communities, and communities of color, share power in all levels of decision-making throughout council development processes. And equity often requires the redistribution of both power and resources to improve the lives of these communities. And lastly, but not least, accountability. And accountability is to measurably improve current and future outcomes is defined by those most affected by them. And these outcomes must reflect a nuanced and shared understanding of positive change built through community-centered, culturally competent engagement. And so with that, today we are going to participate in a workshop session. And this has been highly successful in past feedback sessions to ensure that everyone has a chance to be heard and share out their feedback. We will be breaking out into your small groups and discussing the following 2 questions. What about this definition resonates with you? And how do you want to use this definition? How does it help achieve regional goals? I know we only have an hour of your time, so don't mind the 10-minute clock. It's not Jeopardy. You have your time. You can share out with your groups. And then at the end of the 10 minutes, we will share out as tables so we make sure that you're all heard of that process. And then there will be note takers at each one of your tables. And we will be making sure that we write down all of your feedback and that it's all heard. Yeah. Cool. So with that, let's break up. I think this goes.
Do we have to have the mics on for this part? Because if it's broadcasting all the tables at once, it would be.
Yeah, we can definitely have that option. That's why we have that share out portion at the end.
Craig's gonna.
Yeah, yeah. And that's why we have the share out portion so that it can be heard in broadcast.
Otherwise, we create harm, right?
Yeah.
No, for everybody turning it That way you get. Are you here?
Yeah, I was gonna ask.
Oh, yeah, I'm here.
So, we
Just note taking, you
Oh,
guys are in
wow.
the driver's seat. I'm
Do you
just
feel
here.
comfortable one person
I
goes
was
with
gonna, one
t-shirt?
thing going on there.
Is that all right too? All right. Great minds think alike.
I can grab a chair.
Who wants to go first?
Yeah, I mean, I guess
everyone. Thank you so much for such a great conversation. We do have a short report out from each table, so I hope you've each nominated one person that will be speaking on your account. We'll go first because I'm the one speaking at the moment, and Dr. Carter will be reporting out for us.
Okay, so we were looking at our discussion questions. What about this definition resonates with us, the equity definition, and how do we want to use this definition to achieve regional goals? And of course, it's equity at what we talked about, what it means, excluded communities, especially Black communities, indigenous communities, and communities of color. And the measured outcomes and intentional and consistent practices, adopting some policies and services and spending so that they contribute to the repair of both historical and ongoing injustice. And so one of the concerns was that, for example, a white person, say, living in the suburbs is not really included in this. And that, and then I always look at the idea of a quilt. You know, we're a tapestry of humanity. And so in order to be a strong quilt, you know, if anybody's ever done any quilting, it has to be, the threads have to hold it together. And if you put it together right, it's going to be a beautiful quilt. It's going to be strong. It's going to serve everybody. But so, of course, I was happy to see Black and indigenous communities of colors being championed. But the issue was brought out that we also have to look at disabled people. We also have to look at, if I'm a poor white person living in the suburbs, I'm also suffering inequities. And how does that become addressed? One of the things that we know is that poverty is a cross cutter. It cuts through everything. So Lyndon Johnson was one of the people that said that, and that's how he came up with his Race Society program. The idea that if you're poor, doesn't matter what you are, you're going to be suffering. And so if we look at poverty, so in our definition, we have to have a tapestry answer that looks at all those things as variables. So there's the variable of being a poor white person, and what things affect that person. There's a variable of being a poor Hispanic person, or being a poor Black person, or being a poor indigenous person, or being just being a disabled person, because the nature of being disabled means you're denied opportunity and access. And so we have to have answers, and we have to assign values to those, because really those are variables. And we have to have assigned values to those variables, and we have to weight them in such a way that everybody walks away from the table feeling like they got a meal and nobody was denied. Because if that doesn't happen, people want to upset the table because they don't want anybody to eat. A good case of that was the French Revolution. They upset the table because they said, we're peeking through the windows and they're eating, they're having feasts, and we're starving.
Thank you, Dr. Carter. I'm just going to call on this table over here next.
We empowered our staff.
Yes. In the spirit of power sharing, I've been asked to share. Yes. Laura Brethheim, Metro Transit. A few themes that came up at this table. We touched on a lot of different things. I would say the theme that Councilmember Carter brought up of
Laura, can you talk a little louder?
oh, yes. Sorry, I'm a bit soft-spoken. Thank you for the reminder. A few things came up at this table, building off what Councilmember Carter shared, the question of including folks beyond race, particularly the disability community. It came up at this table, and thinking about some possible ways in which that could be incorporated into this definition. That was one top point of discussion, but in general, appreciated the call out of Black, Indigenous, and communities of color, and that race is included here. Also, please, if I am misinterpreting, please feel free to correct me. Some questions about what some of our terms mean, like spending, that can mean a number of different things. Are we thinking about money, time, investments, all of those things, some of them more specifically. And then had a conversation about the word adapting and adapting policies and how that resonated with folks as really showing that there's a moral imperative and a moral obligation for the council to adapt and to move forward with this idea. So that was a large topic of conversation here. So I think I'll leave it with those two unless anyone else would like to share. Great job.
Great job.
Thanks.
I can say. Okay, so we started out our conversation kind of talking about different identities and how our identities have changed over time. So we talked about how, African Americans were colored and then we were Negro and then we were Black and then we were African American and now we're probably going back to Black. So it historically changes, and then we talked about the changes with Latina, Latin which I'm understanding is the latest.
The latest one I've heard.
Okay, so it was
I haven't checked my mail
Latinx
lately.
before that. It was actually Latin-E. And then you want to go through the series that you gave me? Because I don't know.
We
if I
were
can-
just talking about it, and I said, when I remember the day my dad had me do my Social Security, and I was white, because you were white, black, or other, that was it. And so then I was Mexican, then I was Mexican-American, and then I was Chicano, and then I was Hispanic, and then I was Latino, and then I was Latinx, and now there's Latina with an E on the end. So we're just talking about how, and then there's a context to each one of those. I mean, a Chicano isn't something that would be that wide known, but it was during the 60s, 70s, and it was, more of a political movement than it was an identity. So anyway.
Yeah, so as we're talking about definitions and contextualizing things, that's the contextualization. We also talked about the BIPOC, the Black Indigenous Communities of Color. That's actually by COC, often called POC. And then there's also the ALANA, which is African American and African Immigrant, Latina, Asian, and Native American communities in Minnesota. So the identity conversation often has political implications to it. So that's part of the contextualization that I think is referred to in this discussion today. What else did we talk about? The difference between measurably improved outcomes and what can have the most impact versus saying opportunity. What are the differences there? And that outcomes is more direct and is more intentional than opportunity, because you can create opportunities and then those opportunities are not taken advantage of. We talked about why those opportunities may not be taken advantage of even for the people that may benefit. And that may be because of the historical harm that has been caused to them, to where they are either overwhelmed, fatigued, mentally hopeless, and other things, or even negative internalization that has happened due to oppression historically over time. So we had some deep conversations about that, and that the reparative equity is so important to get people caught up, which is basically what you're doing with the equity, is getting people caught up. But because of the continuing and ongoing injustices, it's very difficult to get caught up, especially without the intentionality.
I just want to add one thing, and that is, and I brought up the term, or the opportunity question, but more importantly, I'm just looking at it as I don't see a lot of hope in this. I think it's, and so I just, it's something you read real quick and move on, because I don't know how you relate to it, and that's what it says, how do we define opportunity or access, or something's got to mean something in this. That's where I was at.
So we sort of talked about that too, in terms of how do we incentivize this so that we can get to those improved outcomes, but we're just doing the definition right now. That's part of the strategy.
The hope will come later.
Keep hope alive.
Thank you so much. We are, because like I mentioned, we're on a time crunch here, we're gonna be efficient. We're gonna invite Sarah, to talk about the environmental justice definition. I'm just gonna stay here.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you for your time. My name is Sarah Gong. I am a qualitative researcher in community development. I am also the co-lead with Angela Torres for the Environmental Justice Task Force. The Environmental Justice Task Force is a subgroup of the Equity Task Force, so very coinciding with each other. It's an honor to be here with you all today. And so I'll take you, thank you, Marcus. I will take you through the environmental justice definition development process. It was very similar to the equity definition development process. We conducted an inventory of environmental justice definitions from public agencies such as the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency, DNR, grassroots organizations, indigenous tribes, EJ organizations, as well as the federal definition. Then we crafted a draft definition and received feedback from the ORP integration team, from regional and climate natural systems teams, as well as the equity task force. And we revised the definition, and now we are here today for your feedback. So our environmental justice definition is: environmental justice is the right for all residents to live in a clean, safe environment that contributes to a healthy quality of life. This is environmental justice context, much like the equity definition, that we feel is important to include to supplement our definition. Firstly, we must center communities who experience a legacy of systemic barriers that have resulted in environmental injustices. Next, it also requires change in the way we work by conducting community-centered engagement, being reparative, thinking about ongoing harms, and distributing benefits equitably and preventing future burdens. And then finally, it requires necessary adaptations to our services, policies, practices, processes, and decisions. And so now we will go back to our small groups and have the same questions. So the first one, what about this definition resonates with you? And how do you want to use this definition? And how does it help achieve regional goals? So with that, we will go back to where we just were.
Trying to be mindful of our time, so we're gonna do the share out portion of this discussion, and we will start over here, and I know I see Sarah is sharing out.
Yes, so we had a wonderful, insightful discussion. Firstly, what resonated was that environmental justice is a fundamental right. It is important to distinguish equity and environmental justice. While they are very interconnected, there are separate frameworks on how to approach them. We discussed that while there might be federal guidelines that we adhere to, we can still take it further. We definitely don't want to be behind, but we can still get ahead. So a specific example that was brought up was requirements with the BRT line. While we may be adhering to federal standards, we could still be contributing to local air particulate matter, asthma rates, pollution, etc. And so we also discussed that we liked that all residents means all residents. It's intersectional, it includes everybody. And it really shows the confluence of the Thrive 2040 outcomes of equity and sustainability. So there was a suggestion to include sustainability for a clean, safe, and sustainable environment, which also contributes to the idea that a healthy quality of life is not just for today, but for future generations. And we discussed the cumulative impacts as well as some fun strategies for bringing in tough conversations into tough and new or innovative conversations into spaces that might not be accepting or familiar with this kind of work. Anything to add?
No.
Thank you.
Okay, how about we move over to this table over here?
Okay, they've nominated me this time.
Yeah.
Yeah, in this instance, I didn't ask for it, but I'm happy to do it. Okay, so there were several things that resonated as part of this definition. There was the context around systemic barriers. Some of the buckets that were on the second slide were referenced a lot, talking about the clean, safe, healthy environment was good, except that there wasn't a broad understanding of what safe is. That's a very kind of hot and heavy word, and so just needing some context around some of those things, but there did seem to be more broad agreement in that this definition covered checked a few more boxes for y'all. Is that right? I'm gonna leave it at that. Unless you wanted to add anything to that.
I think I'm up again. So we also had a very wide-ranging, insightful conversation here. Overall, felt like folks resonated with how inclusive this definition was, and that it was really encompassing, all-encompassing in its content. We also talked about the term right here, and that it does feel like a right, but some questions about the sort of the gravity of that term in policy and if it's appropriate here. So kind of an open-ended question about like resonating with the intent of that term, but unsure if it's correct for this application that covers it. And then also started talking about, having this lead into availability of tools and knowledge for people to know about their environment and if they are living near harmful places and what is around them, and thinking about that in terms of the applicability of this definition, how it's being used, and what the council can do to make people more aware or help them understand what the place they're living in is like. Well-being, maybe. Oh, and well-being, yes. We also talked about the term well-being as a possible addition to healthy quality of life and well-being.
And just the qualifier on that is healthy is one thing, but if you you have well-being, you can, it's not just about your health, but your mental state is better and your physical state and your abilities, it's about, how you can manage with your family and your job and all of that.
Maybe economic health.
Yes, all of that. We thought they all were connected to environmental justice.
Okay, thank you so much, council members. This was really enlightening, gave us a lot of information to use as we continue doing our work on refining some of these things. One of the topics that was mentioned at this table too was what measurable outcomes are, and there's a lot of discussion leading up into that future work, so that's a piece of this work as well. For next steps, just to give you a highlight of next month, we will be coming back to this committee to talk about the engagement work that comprehensively across all of the policy areas, what's been done, who we've been engaging with, but most importantly, what those key themes are, how we're using that in policy, what we're actually hearing from people, so that you all can have a really foundational understanding of where that analysis is across all of the engagement that's happening, across all of the divisions, across all of the policy areas. So it's a lot of work, and we're happy to come and share that with you next month. With that,
I think we're through.
thank you so much.
Thank
Thank you, Angela, Maya, Sarah, and everybody who's involved in that. What great exercise, wonderful conversation. Lisa, your team, everybody who's involved in this, really, we're looking forward to the next step. Now, water scenario planning. Yay, water. Oh, well, we need some water.
I'm built on the old Winnipeg County, where the courthouse is. I'm built on the old farm, where they had to go farm. Let's go. Yes, and the animals. And then eventually we go.
Who they buried?
That's true.
I think we're ready. Thank you, Mr. Chair and council members. We are here to talk today about scenario planning that we've done for the water work that we do in environmental services. I'm Judy Sventek. I'm manager of the Water Resources Group, which is in the planning department in environmental services. And I'm here with Jen Kostrzewski, Lanya Ross, Walter Atkins, who have worked on some of the scenario planning. We'll be talking about their specific areas. I also want to acknowledge that Al Colvin is in the audience and Emily Davila, and they also helped with this effort. And I'm just going to introduce the topic. They're going to talk about the different scenario we did, and really the scenario work that we did are in 3 areas. We did surface water scenario work, water supply related scenario work, and wastewater system findings. So we'll be sharing those results in a moment. Sustainable water resources are critical to our success as a region and our area of our key responsibility for us in environmental services. From stormwater and water resources planning to water supply planning, wastewater planning, and operation of our wastewater system, we play a huge role in our success in achieving our water sustainability goals. This slide is just meant to show how all the water systems are connected, so that we need to think about all the systems and how they interact together as we have these conversations. As we move through our presentations, keep in mind that water doesn't respect jurisdictional boundaries. We must collaborate to best protect it. Regional watershed and local planners need to work together early with developers to create the most impactful developments within the region. Water is all connected. A spill or a leaky tank could impact surface water and groundwaters. Therefore, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. We should work to reduce and mitigate potential contaminants in source water and other regionally significant areas. Climate may drive much bigger differences in our water demand and aquifer recharge than different land use scenarios that we've been talking about today, so keep that in mind. Climate's going to be a big impact on all of this. Recharge areas should not be paved over. Wetlands and natural spaces provide built-in water storage, and we have to think about that as we're developing and planning for our growth as well. The purpose of this slide is really to illustrate how these measures matter, looking at the alignment between impacts and our regional goals to prep us for the policy development discussions we'll be having. So where pollutant loading and flow increase is an equity issue. water impacts are very local. So where development happens, this may result in increased pollution and flow inequitably. Increased pollution and flow cause less healthy water bodies, dangerous flooding, and greater degradation to our landscapes. Pollution and flow are highly impacted by future climates, as I mentioned earlier. How we prepare for our future climate could make a big difference for the pollution and the flow of our waters in our state and in the metro area. So with that really quick overview, I'm going to turn it over to Jen, who is going to talk about, Jen Kostrzewski, sorry, who's going to talk about our surface water scenario planning that we did.
Hello, Mr. Chair and council members. It's a pleasure to be with you this evening. My name is Jen Kostrzewski. I am the Assistant Manager of Policy and Planning for the Water Resources Group. That's okay. I'm excited to share these findings with you, but I also want to give credit where credit is due. And so a colleague of mine, Emily Ressiger, was the powerhouse behind crunching these numbers. And she is such a powerhouse that she has moved on to a different position, which we are very excited for her for. And so I just want to give credit to that is Emily's work, and she did a very good job with it. So as we're going to jump into this, I do want to share some key surface water concepts. You will be hearing from all three of us with our various perspectives. I also want to tie back to what Judy said, water is water. So while I might be talking about it when it is on the surface, it is still the same water. And when we are thinking about water on the surface and in other locations, land use change really affects the way how water moves through this region. And so when we were looking at our modeling results, as we put different population and different growth within the region, we knew there was going to be impacts for land use change. And so that was one of the key indicators that we used when we were evaluating our surface water impacts. We also looked specifically, I'm going to share with you results for nitrate and chloride. We also looked at water volume change and phosphorus loading, but just due to time, I'm not going to go through all the details. I'm going to show you the most dramatic results with nitrate and chloride. Nitrates are nitrates are pollution that comes through our systems, and they are sourced usually from fertilizer in agricultural fields. The fertilizer is necessary, nitrate is necessary for plant growth, but if we put too much of it into our environment, we can have negative water quality outcomes, including algal blooms, which can lead to fish kills and other health impacts for aquatic life. And if nitrate gets into our drinking water supplies, we also can, at high levels, have impacts. For chloride, I think we all know, in the winter at least, where one major source for chloride is, and that's from our road salts. Additional sources for chloride as they're coming within the region is from water softeners, animal wastes, and some fertilizers also have chloride in it. And so when there's too much chloride in the environment, it becomes a permanent pollutant. It is near impossible to get chloride out of our waters. And it creates a toxic environment for our aquatic life, which is why we're looking at these two different loads through our results. So, cut to the chase for land use change. On the right-hand side, there is a bar chart. If you see the values or the bars going above the zero line, that is showing what type of land use will be increasing in the various scenarios. If you see where the bars go below the line, that's the type of land that will be converted to account for the change at the top. So that's how this graphic works out. And as you can see, no scenario actually brings dramatic change to land use. And almost all of that land use, again, across all of the different scenarios, that land use looks as though it's going to manifest itself into single-family housing at the expense or at the consumption of agricultural land or undeveloped land. And then just some other points to point out is that high compact and low disperse show very similar land use to our business as usual. And the high disperse and low compact are high disperse and low compact are the most different from business as usual. So what does this mean for our water qualities in our surface? So if we look, this is a very colorful slide. So if we look at the left-hand side, this is the aggregate results across the entire metro. And you can see that across all of the different scenarios, we are seeing decreases in our nitrate concentrations. And that is because of the land use conversion that we are seeing in the model. Majority of our nitrate in our metro is produced from our agricultural fields. If we take most of that out of production and switch it to single family, we won't be applying fertilizers at the same load. And so we will be seeing the decreasing. But the other part that I want to show you is while it is good to look at aggregate values across the metro, it also is very important from a water perspective to look at individual watersheds within the metro, because water contamination and loading happen at a very local level, and you will see local responses. And so on this map, we did plot out what would be the impact of the 37 watersheds that make up the metro area. Excuse me. And so when you look at those maps, the darker the purple, that shows the greater decrease in nitrate, and then if it gets more to the pale or yellow, we're seeing some slight increases in nitrate. There's some of these maps, I mean, yes, there's some variation in the colors, but as we can see, the high growth and more dispersed is the most darker map of all of them. And that is because we are putting a lot of people spread out within the metro. So we are going to be converting more of that agricultural and undeveloped land. And conversely, the low growth compact isn't going to be putting people further out and as many people further out and more dispersed in metro. So we're not seeing that conversion happening as dramatically. Our chloride trends are showing a little bit different across the board. It's the same layout, sorry, this slide has the same layout as before. So on the left-hand side is the metro aggregate values, and then we do see the watershed maps on the right-hand side. It's the same layout, but it's a different story. So as we can see on chloride, all of the models across the board are showing increases in chloride concentrations when we're thinking towards 2050. And that is because with more development, we tend to have more roads, more parking lots, more surfaces in which we will be applying the salt to prevent people from slipping and falling or slipping off roads. And so on the map, you can see the darker the red color is the more chloride runoff that we see, and the yellow to blue is either little or no change in chloride concentration, or slight decrease. Across the board, we are seeing that the metro area is staying around the same color, and that's because a lot of the development has already happened there. So we're going to see the same levels of chloride concentration. Where things start to get interesting, and again, this only proves that local impacts happen with local waters based on development, is that we can see those areas of red are moving a little bit around the fringes of the metro as we are placing different people in different scenarios out there. And so we are seeing that we are having some impacts depending on where we place our people, so that our land use changes and it affects how our water and pollutants get distributed. The reason I showed you nitrate and chloride and those different patterns is that there is no scenario that is a universal best fit for water quality. Like, there's going to be trade-offs when we look at all of the different pollutants that we're looking at. I showed you two, and our monitoring staff monitors for way more than for the pollutants. And so we do see different patterns in our pollutants. It just depends on which one we are looking at. So it depends on the pollutant concern to tell the story that you're thinking of. When we are thinking about surface water impacts, we know that they are going to happen at local bodies of water. And we also know that, especially with chloride, it's those smaller water bodies that will be most impacted because they don't have that water volume to dilute the impact of the pollution. And so we are, when we are looking at our future, or these scenarios into the future, we are looking at some of the greater impacts on our smaller bodies of water within the region.
Can I ask just a quick question?
Yeah.
How does the Clean Water Act come in? Because as a council member for years and years and years, they had to demonstrate to us, the developers had to demonstrate that the water quality would be either the same or improved, and that's why we have the urban runoff ponds that had to be part of it. They had to, mitigate. The watersheds all had to sign off on it, and so we had a lot of scientists and engineers working on every development that came through after the Clean Water Act. And we started to be serious about it, and then banning fertilizers and things like that. So, and then too, with ag, you know, in my part of the district, there was the big woods that have come down for farms. So then farms are putting things on the crops and there's no mitigation. So I'm just trying to understand, are we just dealing with what's out there, or are we dealing with, you know, because I was taught that you could actually take, you know, some farmland and then, you know, you could pond and you could make sure that the water coming off that property was improved to a standard that we were legally required to meet before it hit one of our 4 watersheds.
Yeah.
So is that happening still, or?
Mr. Chair, council member, right now for nitrate, we do have water quality standards for drinking water, but we actually don't have water quality standards for surface waters. And so, but that being said, like, they are in development, and the PCA has been having conversations with a lot of different agencies as to where we want to land with those water quality standards. We have made a lot of great strides since 1972 in the passage of the Clean Water Act. So I do want to, again, give credit where credit is due. A lot of what I'm looking at for, and what we're talking about when it's nitrate runoff and chloride runoff, it's that non-point source pollution that is very difficult to try to manage, because you don't have that pipe that you can start looking for compliance results and permit results. It's happening because it's a byproduct of humanity. And so there are behaviors, there are policies that we can put into place to try to reduce the impacts of this non-point source pollution. We do have smart design, and we are working with watersheds to have best management. That's actually my next slide, is to talk about best management practices, and that this is not just a dismal story that I am telling you. There's hope. And so we are working with our partners to try and mitigate what we are seeing. It's just that these are the scenarios that we are finding, and these are some of our best guesses at what the future could hold. And so, and estimates of what the future may or may not hold. I also want to just take a step back in case anyone else wants to respond to that question.
Sure, Mr. Chair, Councilmember, I'd like to add so that there isn't great changes in any of these. I mean, there are practices in place. This all assumes that, you know, cities or watersheds will require best practices to happen and continue to happen. This is just really looking at this 4 scenarios that we were given to look at, of which if you're going to densify things, you're going to have more roads, so you are going to have more chloride, and there isn't really good BMP to reduce chloride other than reducing salt, which often can't happen because of safety of roads. The nitrogen switch that we see is really from it should improve because there's more coming out of the ag lands and the nitrogen sources in the metro belt less. So it's kind of very dependent on the 4 scenarios that we were given, and we are, you know, acknowledging, and this incorporates the fact that best practices are in place and things that will continue in that way as well. So.
Okay, because the billions of dollars that we all spend in engineering firms to help us, you know, at the local level, not pollute, but I appreciate that some of that can't be controlled too, and even when you're trying to control it, you don't always control it, but I just didn't know how that fit in, because boy oh boy have I read a million development reports that went deep into that and served on a water shed. We have 3 watersheds in a water district, very different by the way, but I just thought I'd bring that up because otherwise, I don't know, if you haven't been in local government, you have no idea how much this is regulated, and developers have to do what they have to do or they don't get approved.
Wendy?
Thank you. Forgot who I needed to raise my hand for.
Got a gavel.
I've heard this presentation before, and I brought this up at the last time, but there are best management practices related to chlorides with both road design and parking lot design, and where you store the snow and how fast you plow, and we need to acknowledge those things because we, you know, some parts of the region have been able to make great strides at reducing their amount of salt that they put on pavements, and we should be encouraging the entire region to do that.
I'll put my MnDOT hat on just for a minute.
Oh, good.
We actually do better on salt than our neighboring states, like half as much as Wisconsin. And part of it is because of the software that was invested to ensure that everything that's on the road is measured and we don't do it twice. And it's amazing how best practice and technology can actually help. You need salt for safety, but you don't need as much as we've done. And I think we talk about the water softeners, which is really a huge issue, and frankly, big box retailers, which maybe this is changing because people are shopping at big box is quite the same, but it's actually the liability of pedestrians coming into stores. If you walk in to a Walmart or Target and see just the bags of salt around the entrances, and who's driving that? Attorneys doing personal injuries for people who are slipping. So the answer is just throw even more salt. Like, there's more opportunity, I think, for getting maybe certification or looking at liability laws of slips and falls. I mean, it's funny how it all kind of interconnects. So I think there is opportunity, but I'm on my little soapbox. But I think this is very much of an evolving practice to reduce chlorides, and there's more we can do.
Yes, Mr. Chair and council members, you're right. The pre-wedding they do with before they put the solutions out on the roads has really come a long way. And also you pointed out, it's that liability around the private applicators that are putting salt out. There's trainings out there, they're making some advances, but they're still, without a limited liability law, which has been proposed several times and hasn't really gone very far, it still makes people leery and they just put more salt on because they think it will make, that's what they have to do.
Just to finish this slide up, I do want to highlight that, and Judy mentioned, we used the scenarios that all of the other teams responded to, but one of the findings that we kind of knew in the beginning, and I think our results are showing, is that really the bigger scenario and the bigger uncertainty from our perspectives is thinking about climate. Because as the climate change, that is going to shift the delivery, the volume, the timing of water and how it moves through our region. And so we have some future plans to hopefully work some climate projections into the work that we do as well, so we can start getting information. So connections to land use, and this is the last slide in which we will talk about BMPs, but as the data show, we are seeing that the conversion of land use will manifest itself as single-family residential lots. And so this is where we think about policy and behavior. As we know that this development is going to happen, how can we best guide and help our local communities implement this development? And how can we do it in ways that have minimal impacts to water bodies in their area? And so one of the ways that we work with our partners within the watersheds and within the communities are these best management practices. And so we know that pollution might go up or down in 2050, but we know that there are technologies currently that we are implementing that can help mitigate the impacts of pollution. And so this is where I will be an optimist and say, even in 2050, the technology is going to be even better, and hopefully it can help us fight this battle of water pollution. And so those BMPs encompass a huge swath of ideas, from smart design and green infrastructure, nature-based solutions. Smart salting is also on the list. And these practices are going to be needed now more than ever, especially in the challenges that climate will bring for our surface waters. And so with that,
just one quick.
Yeah, go ahead, Judy.
And again, I just have to say too, I agree, if there are no rules and all that, but there's so much great opportunity in redevelopment. So part of my community was developed prior to the Clean Water Act. We were just filling in wetlands, not me personally, but and it didn't matter where it ran, and we were putting our rain down into the sewer system and all the things. But with redevelopment, it's great because now we're getting at that and we're requiring them to, you know what I'm saying. So we in the cities that I represent that are a lot of the fully developed are really looking at redevelopment as a huge opportunity, which I'm sure the other communities must be doing too. So.
Yeah, absolutely. I think thinking about infill lots and as we're thinking about redevelopment and redesigning some of our infrastructure that we use for stormwater management, it's again a very good opportunity for us to really hopefully make an impact as we are starting to plan for 2050.
Thank you. Switching gears a little bit, although it's still connected, we also wanted to share some information with you about some of the water supply scenario findings. And I just want to maybe make a connection too between surface water quality changes and water supply. They're connected. A lot of those surface water impacts infiltrate the ground, and so we are seeing nitrate issues in our groundwater supplies, and we're seeing chloride plumes in our groundwater moving toward our municipal wells. And so as you think about supporting best management practices for surface water, you're also providing benefits as we think about water supply. So one connection. As I talk about water supply, sorry, I'm Lanya Ross. Judy introduced me earlier. I'm an environmental analyst, and I've been focusing on water supply planning at the council for about almost 18 years now. So I'm just going to share a couple of high-level analyses that I did looking at some of the water supply aspects, and I focused on two pieces. Land use data, because our different land use types are associated with different potential contaminants, and the Department of Health has done a nice job documenting some of those differences. And I'm particularly interested in what land use changes might be happening in areas that have been designated by the Department of Health and our communities as drinking water supply management areas, affectionately known as DWSMAs. So if you hear me use that phrase, that's what that means. The other piece that I was looking at is population, because our changing population is associated with changing water demand. And we can do some high-level estimates of what that population change might mean for water demand using some assumptions of per capita water use and population numbers. And so what I tapped into was assumptions used in the 2015 Twin Cities Metro Area Water Supply Plan, because that had a lot of public input, went out for public review. So that's the methodology that I thought would be a good seed for this kind of analysis. Before I get into results, I just want to provide a little bit of framing information. Whenever I can, I try to make a point to share this map. On the map, you see the areas of the Twin Cities metropolitan area that have been designated as drinking water supply management areas. These are the areas that supply groundwater to about 90% of the population. We also have water supplied by surface water, Minneapolis, St. Paul, the communities they provide, but surprise, surprise, people don't stay in one place. We're all drinking each other's water. There are also thousands of private wells that blanket the metropolitan area outside of these areas. But these designated groundwater supply management areas are very important for our water supply. And I'm particularly interested in, for this analysis, those drinking water supply management areas that have been designated as being very highly vulnerable to contamination. They are the dark green on this map. And just to help you, they're fairly small areas. The areas of Brooklyn Park and Burnsville stand out as having highly vulnerable drinking water supply management areas. And to give you a sense of the potential impacts, groundwater flowing beneath those areas supplies about 140,000 people. So keep that in mind as I share my results. As Jen shared, if we look at the entire region and all of the 4 growth scenarios, the biggest change in land use is to single-family residential. However, if we focus in on the very highly vulnerable drinking water supply areas in our metro area, the biggest land use change in all 4 scenarios is an increase in industrial use. It's much bigger in the high growth scenarios, but it does occur in all. And if you look at the scale on here, you'll see it's a fairly small area of land use change, up to 50 acres. But I think as regional long-term planners, it's important for us to ask the question, is the regional benefit that we get from developing those industrial sites worth more than the risk to drinking water supplies for 140,000 people or more? So that, I think, is an important planning question to consider. Switching gears from land use to water demand, so quality and quantity. We also looked at the potential implications for regional water demand of a changing population. And so it was a very simple calculation. using assumptions about the number of gallons per person per day that we developed for the 2015 Twin Cities Metropolitan Area Water Supply Plan, times the community population in a given year in our forecasts or scenarios. How many gallons of water are we seeing used in each of the communities across the metropolitan area in a given year? So we can sum it up and say, what does this mean for our region as a whole? But then we can also look at how future water use might be different in these different scenarios in our different communities, which is interesting because they have different water supply sources. Some use surface water, some use groundwater. So we'll look at that balance. The results. Right in the middle is a bar that represents the projected water demand, the average of all four scenarios. And it's about 450 million gallons a day. The little black bar shows the highest scenario water demand and the lowest, so you kind of get a sense of the range in all of those scenarios. For comparison, you can look at the four bars on the left. That was the projected water demand that we published in the 2015 Metropolitan Area Water Supply Plan. So we estimated water demand in 2020, 2030, 2040, and 2050. And with a lot of input from our water supply stakeholders, we also included a range of uncertainty. Looking historically at how water demand changes over the years due to different weather patterns, different economic development, global pandemic, we see that plus or minus 20% is a pretty reasonable estimate of how certain are we about water demand in any given year. So those black dashed bars represent that 20% range. So that's our current plan. When I look at this, it's really reassuring to me that that water demand projection approach that we took in 2015 and the call to use a range of uncertainty helps us, because our current change, even though we're changing our sense of what the future might look like, it's within our expected range. So I think, to me, that suggests continuing to use that range of water demand estimates in our planning will be a useful tool. So thinking about how our policies are flexible enough to accommodate that uncertainty. Another thing that I want to highlight, a point Jen made, is that while our uncertainty about growth in the future does affect our understanding of what water demand might be, it is not the only uncertainty. Climate is also an important thing that we should be considering in terms of its impact on our water demand needs for the future. And so thinking about what policies do we want to have in place to be able to respond to different climate futures, I think is also important. And the last piece that I want to share with you related to the water demand analysis I did is related to the balance between how much groundwater are we using as a region versus how much surface water are we using as a region. Because we estimated water demand by community, and we know which communities are tapping the Mississippi River and which are tapping groundwater sources, we're able to look at the balance under our different growth scenarios. So from left to right, I have each of the four planning scenarios as the dispersed high growth scenario on the far left, followed by the dispersed low growth scenario. So that's growth on the suburban edge. And then the two bars on the right are the compact growth scenarios, both the high and low. So if more development occurs at Minneapolis, St. Paul, kind of closer in. And one of the things that stands out to me is that the dispersed scenarios are putting relatively more pressure on our groundwater systems. And in the 2015 Metro Area Water Supply Plan, we did do some work to estimate what might the sustainable limits of our groundwater systems be. That's the blue dashed bar. And so these dispersed scenarios, while still being within our sustainable groundwater limits, are bumping us up closer. And if we start to also think about uncertainty due to climate change, we're edging up closer to potentially the limits of our groundwater supply system now. How we're defining sustainability affects where we set that limit. But that's something I think it's important to keep in mind, thinking about regional policy, land use policy, water supply policy. I believe I have summarized all the findings. In all scenarios, our industrial development is increasing in very high vulnerable drinking water supply management areas. Is that something that we want to commit to as planners? Something to think about with policy. Our growth patterns are impacting future water demand. All of our growth means more water demand. What is our role in terms of helping to be more efficient in how we're using water? We may be able to reduce our per person water use by promoting best management practices, leveraging that technical assistance role that we have. And then also the dispersed scenarios may rely more on groundwater versus surface water compared to the compact scenarios. So just something to keep in mind if we are trying to have a balanced use of our region's water supply sources, what do our development patterns mean in terms of how we achieve that? I will not reiterate everything I just said, so I will pass this over to Walter if you have any questions.
Dr. Carter, do you have a question?
Yeah, I'm gonna ask an obvious question. What happens when we reach the limit of our groundwater supply?
Chair and council member, when we reach the limit of our groundwater supply, we're gonna start to see more and more conflicts. We do see localized effects across the metropolitan area. The challenges in White Bear Lake are one example of that. The well interference issues that the cities of Blaine and Ham Lake are experiencing right now are another example of that. And so the increased management costs, the potential litigation costs, the need for engineering work to try and find alternative water supplies. So those are some of the effects that we would see.
So are we gonna start looking at those, or we're probably already looking at some of those
These are,
choices?
cities and counties are all, that's part of their process.
And I'm gonna turn this over to Judy then.
Mr. Chair, council member, so we are also been charged with the legislature this past session to do a study on the White Bear Lake area. In particular, it's a comprehensive plan that we'll be developing with the communities that are impacted by the whole situation, because right now there's limits on how much water that the communities can use, especially during little droughts and times of more water demand out there, because there's a protective level set for White Bear Lake. The communities cannot draw excess water to supply their water resources to the communities that would further impact the White Bear Lake. And right now, it's kind of a lot of the communities are in a contested case hearing with the DNR about this. So what we're going to work on is a plan of what are some solutions for this area. How can we allow growth in this area, plan for growth in this area, and have that sustainable water resource in there that will also not mean impacting White Bear Lake, as you know. So that's one area that we're doing a special study on. We are looking in our we're doing water demand projections for the region as well. We'll be looking at some of these things and working with community development staff and research staff on forecasts to kind of help influence some of the areas where we might want to push growth. There's other limiting areas like Lanya mentioned. There's issues with the Ham Lake Blaine interference issues. So we're beginning to work on these, and these are becoming more of an influence in our planning than they have been in the past.
Mr. Chair, Councilmember Carter, this I think just highlights the importance of the work that we are doing at the council, looking at water supply planning, because yes, our communities are looking after their own supply and are trying to plan for their future growth, but if you focus on a tree, you miss the forest. And I think that's the part of where our group can help show that there is a larger picture. There is that small, make sure that there is local water supply for our communities, but we need to think of the region as a whole, because we all are pulling from the same aquifers, and those surface waters are connected to those aquifers. And like I was said in the beginning, like we might have split up our presentations into 3 different things, but we're talking about the same water. And so that's where it is good to have a group, and I'm happy it is us, I'm happy it is Lanya that is keeping an eye on that bigger picture, because this is something that we do want to proactively try to work with our communities to prevent from going into that.
If only we had a water engineer at the council. Oh, we do. Gail.
So that, I mean, the heavy lifting that's going on right now within your group is the 2050 Water Policy Plan, which is incorporating the water supply plan. And of course, District 11 has White Bear Lake and the PFAS and everything going on. And it's just the, you know, canary in the coal mine, so to speak, of what is potentially to come throughout the metro. So the heavy lifting they're doing in incorporating all of these things in the water policy plan will be a feeding into the regional development plan. And so that's critical that these concepts are then put into the regional development plan and at least acknowledge that this is going to happen. Because, yeah, we're starting to have water wars. I mean, we have lots of water, we got water wars going on. So, you know, I encourage all the council members to, you know, really go through the water policy plans as well and look at them, and especially how they are going to feed into the regional development plan and how they're discussed in that plan because of all the land use issues, the climate issues, and everything like that. So we've got this amazing team doing all this heavy lifting, pulling these things together, and so we have opportunities. It's coming up fast, you know, in the next year, literally, public comment, we'll be able to comment. And so it's coming up faster than we think to be on top of this. So thank you guys.
Question about the DWISMAs. So, yeah, my favorite acronym.
It is.
DWISMAs. I just learned about that one. And so Minnesota, we're heading full steam ahead towards clean energy. We have a 100% goal, or 100%, we are going to be 100% clean energy by 2040, which means a lot of wind, a lot of solar. And I'm thinking about the DWISMAs, how we need to protect these areas that provide this. And thinking about this other beneficial thing, clean energy, and where these clean energy, renewable energy, where is it going to be located? And so have we thought about, can we think about ways for us to protect the DWISMAs by having co-benefits, clean energy, habitat, pollinators below that, grasslands, you know, things that are good for our water, things that are good for our animals, things that are good for our soils, things that are good for many different things. How can we promote that? How can we encourage that?
Chair, council member, I think that is a great question, and I know that that is one that is being asked by several people. I know that there's some work going on right now by the Great Plains Institute. Seeing Lisa Brajas nodding. And with the council has been doing some work with that group as well, looking at solar farms and where they might be providing the most benefit, where we could place them. And there have been questions about their value in protecting drinking water supply management areas as well. There have been some questions raised about, you know, making sure we know what the quality of the runoff is and impact on stormwater, but leaning into that research and bringing that back as part of some of these policy conversations is something that there's information that's being generated now, so thank you for that question.
It's an exciting frontier that we can keep looking at.
That would be a question, I guess my question back to land use planners, communities, et cetera, is what kind of planning and zoning requirements would be needed to support that type of land use? What types of protections might we want to think about? You know, those are some of the questions that come up to me. Is that, we call them solar farms, is that agricultural? Is that not agricultural?
Or industrial.
You know,
I think it's industrial.
Yeah,
so,
it's industrial.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and council members. Started here. My name is Walter Atkins. I'm an engineer in wastewater planning and community programs. We essentially built a model here where you input all the growth, gets calculated into wastewater flow, and kind of gives us the results. This model was built by myself, Emma Devia, who's here, and Steve Hack, who's not here, but no less unimportant. And with that, let's get on to our findings. So let's get started with some of these key wastewater concepts. Starting with regional system capacity. Capacity utilized, it's impacted by the amount of growth as well as where that growth is occurring. You know, you put a lot of people somewhere, you put a lot of jobs somewhere, they're going to generate wastewater, and that's obviously going to affect the wastewater infrastructure where you put it. And secondly, capital investments are tailored to regional system capacity needs. Obviously, if you don't have a big enough pipe for all that wastewater that people are going to generate, you're going to put a bigger pipe in the capital program. So next is regional service area. Growth within the regional service area is planned to be served by the regional wastewater system. That's our existing lift stations, interceptors, treatment plants, etc. Growth outside the regional service area, it's assumed to be served by individual sewage treatment systems, which are septic tanks, for example, or local rural wastewater treatment plants. They have one out in Watertown, they have one in Afton, for example. And finally, the amount of growth served in the regional service area, it changes by scenario. So keep that in mind. And we must also mention other facilities, such as liquid waste receiving facilities, factor waste facilities, and solids processing. The demand for location and composition of these facilities and services is also going to change by scenario. So, a quick note on the distribution of growth and thus the resulting wastewater flow. This graph here shows the population growth from 2020 to 2050. Growth within the regional service area is blue, which is, you see, is biggest in all of them, followed by outside the regional service area in orange, and rural center growth in gray. So a few things here. The high growth scenarios obviously result in a lot more regional flow. The columns over the high ones are a lot bigger than business as usual and significantly bigger than the low growth scenarios. Also, compact growth results in much more flow generated within the regional service area. So if you look at high compact versus high dispersed, for example, the blue portion of the compact is a much larger portion of that column. We see the same thing with the low compact and low dispersed. Next thing, we are going to look at some of our modeled results for the system capacity. That is the effect on our conveyance infrastructure by the growth within the regional service area. So we're going to see the effect of those blue bars. So let me bombard you with this monstrosity of these two figures here. We just want to visually show what some of the data looks like. It's our job as engineers to comb through this stuff. We'll eventually summarize the results, but the multicolored green to red lines, they show the projected capacity of 2050 of the pipes that convey the wastewater flow. Red indicates a pipe is over capacity, and orange indicates that it's nearing over capacity and we should keep an eye on it. There's a lot of orange and red in there. The green shades in the background, they show where the growth is occurring and consequently where there's higher wastewater flow. The main thing that you can take away from these two figures with high compact on the left and high dispersed on the right, on the left side you see the growth in the core, right in the center, and on the right you see more of a donut shape and you see the growth on the outskirts of the regional service area or just outside of it. These different types of growth, they have different implications on our systems. So we'll take a look at some of the summarized results. Okay. I did not click that. That's all right. This graph, first of all, it shows flow growth within the regional service area in gray, so coming up off the top, the secondary axis, so 64 million gallons per day, or MGD for the high compact, 42 million gallons per day for business as usual, etc. If you recall the distribution of growth from earlier, it's clear that the compact scenarios result in more growth within the regional service area, and you can see that here in the model results. High compact has more growth than high dispersed. low contact has more growth within the regional service area than low dispersed. What's important here is capacity though, which is the main columns coming up off of the bottom. So these things summarize the length of interceptor that are either over capacity in red or nearing capacity in orange. So they're summarizing the confusing slides that I just shared in the last one. If something's over capacity, we need to build a bigger pipe or upgrade a lift station in order to effectively convey those flows. And our key findings are bulleted here. Despite the high growth scenario resulting in 25% more wastewater flow within the regional service area than the high dispersed, less interceptors are over or nearing capacity. And we see the same trend if you look at low compact versus low dispersed. So this indicates that compact growth utilizes our existing infrastructure more efficiently. I'm gonna go back, I didn't press that. We should briefly note here that we haven't completed a full model for our Blue Lake service area yet, which is our second biggest plant, but early results, they indicate it would reinforce these findings. So let's move on to the regional service area discussion now. The graph on the right here shows percent increase in the population outside of the regional service area for the various scenarios with non-sewer in the orange columns and the rural center sewer in the gray columns. And obviously the big picture lies here within the high dispersed scenario where the biggest columns lie. So the orange non-sewer, they are served by individual sewage treatment systems or the septic tanks. High dispersed will result in about 70% more of the population served by them than we have today, which is significantly more than the 20, 30, 40% that we see with the other scenarios. The gray rural centered, they're served by local rural wastewater treatment plants. With high dispersed, their wastewater flow is expected to double what they treat today. So what's concerning here is the potential impact. Individual sewage treatment systems, the growth in them can potentially lead to long-term environmental degradation. In a recent report, MPCA estimates about 13% of the existing systems, they fail to protect groundwater. So that's just one example of how we have these separated systems here that we're presenting today. They're connected by water, and a wastewater issue just became a water supply issue. And finally, growth in rural centers can put stress and pressure on the treatment systems, and that could necessitate costly improvements for the rural communities. We talked about, with chloride, for example, going into a small stream versus a big river load carrying capacity. Many of these small rural treatment centers, they have smaller effluent receiving waters with low pollutant load capacity. So if you double their wastewater flow, you might have to have their concentration, and that can be a very costly endeavor. So, well, outside the regional service area, these all can potentially have significant ramifications on our budget. This pie chart shows our general capital budget distribution, which is about 60% preservation, and the other two halves between expansion and improvement. Preservation and improvement, that's caring for or increasing the quality of our existing infrastructure. Expansion is new or enlarged infrastructure, bigger pipes, more pipes, larger pumps, a new plant, etc. High dispersed has the greatest potential to shift resources towards expansion. So excess non-sewer growth, how it would result in increased sewage treatment systems, it may lead to long-term environmental degradation, and that could necessitate expansion of the regional service area. We have seen this before, where a community with failing systems necessitated the council's intervention to assist and provide regional service because we wanted to protect the environmental effects. That needed expansion can really shift the planned budget distribution. And next is significant growth in the rural centers, how it can put pressure on their treatment systems, as we covered in the last slide. This could push up the timing for or the costly upgrades by the rural centers if they have the means to, but if unable to, it has the potential to lead to a request for council help, either through acquisition of plants or to build a new plant or to expand service, all of which would increase the expansion portion of this pie. There's much less predicted risk of this occurring with the compact scenarios based on the growth and where those happen. So again, the more budget allocated for expansion, the less there is for preservation and improvement of our current assets, and the high dispersed scenario has the greatest potential to create that shift. And we can't forget our other facilities. So, our model results indicate that the high dispersed scenario poses the greatest impact here. And some of these impacts can include increased demand on the outskirts of or outside the regional service area. This could require additional facilities to meet the demand or upgrades at those facilities. And pressure on our smaller regional treatment plants, the upstream interceptors and lift stations. So an example of this, a smaller plant or interceptor, they could face challenges with processing the higher volumes of solids as a result of these other facilities, which would require a lot more operation and maintenance work. Let's see, what's next? Okay, let's tie everything together here with some of our conclusions. So starting with regional system capacity. High compact displays the most efficient use of our existing infrastructure. That is, it treats the greatest amount of flow within the regional service area, yet it results in the least proportional amount of interceptors nearing or over capacity. On the contrary, dispersed scenarios are less efficient than the compact scenarios. So moving on to the regional service area. High dispersed has the highest potential to shift resources toward early or unplanned expansion efforts. Growth in this scenario, it is focused on the outskirts of and beyond the regional service area, so the resulting increase in individual sewage treatment systems and the pressures on the rural treatment centers, that poses the most risk of expansion of our facility if it results in that, as we covered in the budgeting slide. And finally, for other facilities, the high dispersed has the most potential to increase the demand for regional facilities farther out in the regional service area, which is effectively stressing them the most. Oops. Now we will cover connections to land use, which should almost be intuitive now, so forgive me if I sound repetitive here. Starting with inside the regional service area, compact development utilizes existing wastewater infrastructure more efficiently. High dispersed development puts pressure on the outlying areas of the regional service area, which could necessitate infrastructure expansion or affect the timing of the extension or acquisition of infrastructure. And outside the regional service area, high dispersed development puts pressure outside the regional service area. We will see significant growth in individual sewage treatment systems, as well as pressures faced by the rural wastewater treatment plants. And that both of those could lead to induced growth and incentivizing large lots. So I think that's all I have today for wastewater findings. Thank you for your attention, and I think I'll pass it back to Judy for additional considerations, unless we're taking questions now.
I think we should take questions for you before we pass. I'm just gonna wrap it up, so.
Wendy.
I remembered where to raise my hand to. Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I know we have data on capacities on the rural center plants. We should include that in this information because not every regional center is afraid of having too much growth. Some of them have made recent improvements to their plans and are terrified that they won't have growth and will go bankrupt because they don't have people connected to it. So I think we need to be a little more granular there on the regional centers if possible. And I'm not sure where you got the incentivizing large lots, because the only way that that would happen is if landowners suddenly decided to decrease their land prices, which I don't see happening anytime soon.
Chair and Councilmember Wolf, thank you for your comment. We will ensure to incorporate capacities of the rural treatment centers. I don't believe we have that on hand, but we will reach out and get that. And as far as the incentivizing large lots, we made some base assumptions of, instead of a dense core tapering off, we would look at strips of developments kind of on the outskirts of the regional service area. And that has the potential to attract growth from outside the regional service area. Since they're not, bound by the council densities of, sewer growth, like at least 3 units per acre, that might result in development of large lots, since they're not bound by those densities.
Mr. Chair, can I follow up?
Please.
Except they do have required acreages in order to have a septic system, so you can't do like 1 acre lots generally.
Provide some insight here maybe a little bit. Chair, Councilmember Wolf, I think the point that we're trying to make is that if the under the dispersed scenario we're incentivizing growth within the long-term service area. So in other words, it would be growth in those areas that are currently outside of the current reach of our existing treatment facilities. So the assumption is that then that growth would be accommodated through development on septic systems. So it wouldn't be the 3 units per acre, it would be the 2.5 acre lots or 5 acre lots, or if they wanted to stay in diversified rural, it would be 4 per 40 or 10 acre lots. So the larger lots isn't specific to anything larger than 2.5. It's just it's less dense than the required overall 3 units per density that's required for sewer growth. So again, by the dispersed pushes growth beyond the long-term service area, which the assumption is going to be accommodated through septic systems, which again requires more land area to accommodate septic systems.
Or they would just go outside the metro where they don't have all the rules for minimum acreage for septic.
Or it goes right for larger lot development.
Mr. Chair, yeah, thanks. And thanks, Walter. I thought I heard you say once or twice that if the facility's capacity was sort of getting threatened, that one of the responses could be for the council to acquire that facility. Did I hear that correctly? And
They would ask.
What's
They'd
that?
probably ask us to take it over.
And then that's my question is, would then would it, the objective be to regionalize it, and so then that would take additional investment to, okay. I guess I understood it and answering your question.
Right, that's correct, Mr. Chairman, Councilmember Lindgren. We've already had one community to request regionalized service out in Germany. They were successful last legislative session to get $8 million to help fund the improvements that are necessary to meet their standards and to accommodate future growth. We've also had 2 other communities in the rural areas that have acquired what the process and steps are for regionalizing service. So it's becoming more and more expensive to provide that higher level of service that's needed for regulatory requirements. So there are rural communities out there that are investigating what the process is to regionalize. No community really wants regionalized service when, out in the rural areas. They really want that self-autonomy. But when it comes down to the cost, it is in one of their tools to investigate it. St. Francis was another community that wished that they had actually talked to the council before they had made some pretty drastic improvements up in their facilities. But they did that again to maintain their self-autonomy.
Yeah, and Judy, you have no experience with this.
Well, so my district, we have all of this going on. And so the further west you go, northwest you go, what I've experienced in community development's helped me manage some of the relationships, and Kyle, you've been involved in some of this too, where there are developers that want to do denser development, but they've got to find the capacity, and they might not be in the queue in the right growth pattern, right? There's phases that you can grow so it follows the MUSA or whatever. So even in Independence, trying to get the capacity, we had to contact Maple Plain, and we had to go through Loretto, and then we were in Independence, and somehow Medina got involved. So it is complex. And I even remember in Plymouth before, we're almost fully developed now, but as we were growing and MUSA was coming in, we actually lent capacity, I think, to Corcoran or Medina for a while until they could get their pipes coming in from the right direction, get them off our system, and then we could continue to grow. So it is very complicated because the pressures, I'm sure everywhere, but out there are just immense. The developers are all over it. It's blowing up. But they are having problems, staging these in the right ways and getting all the communities around to figure out how they can cooperate, because once a community gives up some of their capacity, well, then that's less capacity for them. So this is all important. I don't think, and I'll talk about Greenfield a little bit, and I hope I get this right, because they're way out there. And, they've got pressures developed too, but they're not part of our system at all. And yet the pressures are there. And, some of the ag preserves are turning over. So it's a complex issue, and the market drives a lot of this. We aren't driving this. We can't drive this. But the important part, and I know this, is that you guys are the people that the cities, sometimes the counties, call. And back to the ground source or surface water. I mean, I just know my community a very, very long time ago, digging more wells is expensive, and we know, that we're using in the Jordan Aquifer, and we're using we're taking water faster out that it's being replenished. So early on, we started implementing the water restrictions, and that's just going to continue. And water tiered rates. If you're using a lot more water, you're going to pay a lot more. And, so all the toolkits that you can put together for communities that aren't in the know about all that. I don't know how that would be possible at this point, especially like the green stuff cities, which are from this now. But you guys are a resource that I know the cities rely on. I think though that it's a delicate balance, because you've got communities out there that see and want growth, but they can't get it yet, and that's where you'll then get people that want to divide it up and do maybe 5-acre lots and have that beautiful hobby farm and pay $2 million for the land and then put a structure on it. That pressure is real too, so.
And so, Mr. Chair, to follow up on the cost impacts of regionalization, and so is it as simple as that shifts 100% of the costs to Metcalfe, to us, or what does that look like as a system would be regionalized from the costs? Who bears the cost?
Yeah, Mr. Chair and Councilmember, the cost for regionalizing, if that was what the question is, when the system is expanded, whether increased capacity or extension of services, any capacity related improvement carries with it a debt service. Mm-hmm. And so that debt service is then paid for by the new users of the system through a SAC collection. And then that's all equated to a residential connection. So for the most part, the cost of extending those services is paid for retired through the SAC. Yeah. Primarily.
I know we're slightly over time.
Sorry.
I want to give Judy a chance to finish up.
Oh, I'm sorry. I
said it was a good question.
Oh, thanks. I thought you were done, Judy.
I am done. I just thought it was a good question.
This is Judy.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Sorry, Robert.
Please be specific on
Yeah.
Judy.
I should have.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and council members. So that was a lot of information, and I lost the slide, and I didn't touch it. I don't know much, it's very touchy, but anyways, I'll do without slides. A lot of information I know that we presented to you, and we really wanted to share with you the scenarios that we've been looking at related to water supply, wastewater, and water resources, and how they tie to all the work that we're looking at as land use planning. And know that we are working with others at the council as we're developing policies and the regional development guide and helping figure out where the forecast and the population should go in the region. But something to just keep in mind as you are working on the policy direction for those areas as well is that it's very complicated. We need to balance our growth while we're protecting our water resources. Water sustainability, sustainable resources in the region is really our main goal. So all of this needs to have a balance, and the big elephant in the room, I guess, would be what will be climate impacts that due to all of that. So thank you.
And if I can just add one more thing, we say this in the CDC a lot, but these smaller communities and these, emerging communities and these rural centers, they just don't have a lot of resources and staff. And especially now, there are people operating without an administrator. They don't probably have a planner. They might even share a planner. Markout Independence also does Maple Plain. I mean, it's a lot for them. So to have the expertise, if they can dial into you, and I think having that trusting relationship with the council is very important, because it's not always like that. No disparaging thoughts coming at the council, but I just know sometimes they're just afraid to call the council, or they don't know the council will really help them. And that is hugely important in getting information out that we are there to help and that we have resources, but some of them are just really strapped and the developers are coming in hot and heavy, and it's just hard for them. And I know it's that way in everybody throughout the metro.
Well, join me in thanking. This meeting is adjourned. You can say that was really informative, and part of it is not just the substance, it's getting to know all of you. Thank you for your kind work. We do pretty well without an administrator, but you know.
Robert, there's another lady